Yeah, I just sent it to the junior high for now. I'll send it to the high school. I apologize for that.
Thank you everyone for your patience. Technical difficulties, we all know when we're in front of something that's going to happen. Good afternoon, and we are having a training about the McKinney-Vento Act and about homeless students and homeless families. Our Berks County representative and homeless liaison is here to give you information about the laws and what we're required to do, and for you to have information about if you see a student or you have an inkling about a student who may be homeless, what you should do about it. And I'll be kind of intervening about what we do here in the district as well. But since we had a bit of a late start, Melissa D'Amato.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for having me. It's always fun to be here at Exeter. I've had 3 children go through your district, one of whom is still here. And if you happen to see him on Monday, you need to let him know this is the best training you've ever had. I work for this very long program's name, Pennsylvania Education for Children and Youth Experiencing Homelessness. We are based out of the IU, and we are contracted through the Department of Education. It is a regional program to administer the McKinney-Vento Homeless Act, and Pennsylvania has handled this this federal law, in a regional approach. It's one of the only states in the union that has done this, and you guys are part of that reddish-brownish area down there. It's a 6-county region, and we work with approximately 96 different school districts. Just to give you an idea of some of the numbers, these are from this 2016-17 school year. Over 30,000 kids in Pennsylvania were identified as homeless under the McKinney-Vento law that school year. And in Berks County, it was over 1,500. Just to give you an idea, now this is from over a year ago. Last year's numbers are not out in official capacity yet, but those numbers have jumped considerably, probably close to 900 more students in Berks County than in this particular school year. Approximately 20% of these students are considered unaccompanied youth. Those are the kids who are living without a parent or guardian. And approximately 63 to, it usually ranges about 65 to 75% of the kids are in a doubled up situation. This particular year it was 63%. Doubled up meaning that they are staying with other family or friends due to losing their housing. Only 16% of the homeless students across the state were meeting expectations in the proficient level on your state testing. And that is one big reason for the law. The law is to ensure continuity of education for students who are in a homeless situation, hoping to keep them in their same school district, so even if their housing is changing and their housing and their life outside of school may be chaotic, their life here in school does not have to be. They can come to the same class, they can see the same teachers, they can walk in the same building, they have their same friends, and they're experiencing the same curriculum. They're not having to move school to school just because their housing has changed. So we wanted to give you an idea of what homelessness looks like under the education law. It's a much broader definition of homelessness than what a lot of people are used to. When you think about homelessness, a lot of times you're thinking of someone who is unsheltered, living in a shelter like Opportunity House, or in a car, something like that. But it is a broader definition under the education law because they want to capture all those students who are displaced from their home for a particular reason and keep their education stable. So under McKinney-Vento, this law was established back in 1987, and it's gone through a number of revisions. The most recent was the ESSA changes in 2015 that took effect in 2016, and as I've said, it is a federal law. And under McKinney-Vento, homelessness is defined as lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. Fixed means that it's not moving. It's not a car. It's not a camper. They're not living in a tent. Regular means that they're going there every night. They consider it their home, their permanent residence. And adequate simply means that it's suitable for human habitation. It has heat. It has running water. It has electricity. It does not have things like mold infestation or bed bugs or something like that that forces them to leave. If you have a family that is lacking the fixed, regular, or adequate home, then they would fall under this law. We want to look at what the living situations are for these families and what McKinney-Vento sees as a homeless situation. So as I said earlier, it is those folks who are living in a shelter like Opportunity House or the domestic violence shelter, or one of the shelters that we have here in Berks County. It can also be transitional housing, meaning that they've left the shelter, they're in housing through a program, but it is not their own home, and that's a transitional housing program. They could be the unsheltered folks that you think of, or living in a car or a park or somewhere that's not suitable for human habitation. As I said, the biggest population is your doubled up population, sharing the residency of others due to losing their home. Something happened, some sort of event happened that they had to leave their home. And they could be staying in hotels or motels. Migrant students, I'm not sure if Exeter has much of a migrant population, but they do come under McKinney-Vento if they are lacking, if they're in one of these above situations. And we have a close relationship with the migrant program, and they also spend a lot of time identifying these families. One of the main reason for identifying these kids is that they get a lot of rights under this law, and you need to be aware of what some of those rights are. They have the right to enroll in school immediately and participate fully in the education program. So for instance, if you have a student who shows up on your doorstep from another school district and they are in a homeless situation and they don't have any of their paperwork, they don't have SHOT records, they don't have any records from the previous school district, they don't have identification, whatever it is that they don't have, they still need to be enrolled in your district, and then the district would have to work with the family to get whatever is missing. And they not only have to be enrolled, they need to be attending class and participating fully in your program. They have the right to enroll in the local school where they happen to be residing or remain in their school district of origin. So if they are, just for instance, say they are a Wilson student, they end up doubled up over here in Exeter, they can either continue in Wilson or they can enroll here in Exeter. If they decide to continue in Wilson, then Wilson School District and Exeter School District would work together to set up transportation so those students can get back and forth to school regularly. And it's a shared transportation. They have the right to receive the same services as their housed peers. And that would be Title I services, Head Start programs, special education programs, anything that your housed student receives, they would automatically receive. They have the right to receive the free lunch, free breakfast program. And they are put onto that program automatically if they are in a homeless situation. And your unaccompanied youth, those kids who are, once again, without a parent or guardian, they are considered independent students under McKinney-Vento. We're going to discuss that population a little bit later in a little more detail. Quickly, because we have a little bit of a lack of time, I wanted to give you a real quick idea of some of the barriers that these kids are facing. They have a very difficult time meeting the criteria for school and for school enrollment. So, which is one, if they're not identified as homeless, they have a hard time getting into school. And this population tends to be very secretive, so they're not always going to come into your office and say to your enrollment people, look, we're in a homeless situation. They're going to try and hide that. And it's the school district's job to know what to look for in order to help identify them and help them get into school and not have their schooling interrupted. Often they are hungry and tired or stressed. If you are constantly looking for another place to stay because you are doubled up with a friend but you can only stay a week and you need to go live with another friend somewhere else, and then you've got to go live with a family member, and eventually you run out of your friends and family members who are willing to put you up for the night or for the week. So they are constantly on the move trying to find a place to stay. And so they're tired, they're stressed, frequently they don't have access to much food. They frequently don't have school supplies they need. They may not have access to Wi-Fi. I know my children have to be on Wi-Fi all the time to do their schoolwork, and a lot of times they don't have access to the Wi-Fi services. And if they're in a shelter, or if they're doubled up with a family in a small apartment and there's 10 people living in that apartment, it's not quiet. It's hard for them to have a quiet place to study. And the limited access to transportation. So if they have not been identified by the school district as homeless, they very well may not have the transportation they need to get to school, especially if they're living in another school district. And a lot of these kids, especially your unaccompanied youth, are lacking that adult support. They don't have someone there who's going to help them get through school and get through all the barriers that they're experiencing. Obviously, this is going to impact their education, which is why you folks need to know about McKinney-Vento. A lot of times they are chronically absent. We have a slide coming up on truancy. Their grades are lower. They're low. Like I said before, they're not meeting that proficient level on their state exams. Frequently, they have special education needs that are not being met. If they're changing school district to school district, a lot of times they're not identified for special education. And the dropout rate is high. So even if they do reach graduation in high school, frequently they're not going on to college. So, but keeping them in school is very difficult. There's been like I said earlier, there's been a large increase in the number of homeless students, at least homeless students identified. Your district has, since I've been working at this job, which is, I don't know, 8 or 9 years, you guys have gone from identifying approximately 10 or 12 kids in a school year to 65 this past school year. So it is a big jump. I'm not sure if that's because you are all just getting a lot better at identifying them, or if there's more of a need in the community. But there is a lot, and it's not just Exeter. It's statewide. It's actually across the country. And so the increases in numbers, but there is not an increase in resources, which is a big problem. And because of that, there's often not room in shelters for them. If there is room in shelters and it's a family, the family would have to be split up. If it's a mother with a few children, and just say one of the children is a 15-year-old boy, that mother may be told that the son has to stay in the men's side of the shelter. And so they're going to opt out of not doing the shelter because of that. No mother would want their son staying in the men's side of a shelter. It's just not suitable for a young man, a young child. But anyway, because of the lack of resources, because of the difficulties getting into a shelter, and because of the rules at a shelter, that's what's leading them to living in a doubled up situation. And as we talked about earlier, when they're in a doubled up situation, very frequently it's not permanent. They're moving house to house, trying to find another place to stay. The doubling up is a very big part of what the unaccompanied youth are doing. They're going sofa to sofa, staying at friends' houses. Frequently, they're staying in very dangerous situations in order to have a roof over their head. And the frequency of doubling up is really high, but it is not a stable living situation for the most part. And as I said earlier, truancy is a huge problem with this population, and school districts tend to get very frustrated with them because they're not in school. They are looking for a place to stay, they're looking for food to eat, and school is pretty low on the totem pole of what is important to them. They often lack the transportation to get to school. So especially if they have not been identified, they're not going to be able to get to school due to lack of transportation. If they have been identified and they do have transportation set up, there's often other reasons that they don't want to come to school. A lot of times they're embarrassed about their situation. And if they show up at school on a bus that they're not normally on, kids are going to start asking questions, and they're going to be embarrassed, so they're not going to want to be here. A lot of times they don't have the appropriate clothing that everybody else is wearing. Another reason for embarrassment. They don't want to explain their situation. They're, especially at the high school level, a lot of times are also very overwhelmed with the amount of work that they have missed. So due to their homeless situation, if they're not getting into school and they've missed 20, 30 days of school, they don't see a reason to come. They don't see a reason that they can catch up on their schoolwork and get to the next grade or reach graduation. Under the revisions in ESSA, it was written that into the law that it is the school district's responsibility to get these kids caught up in their education. So if their absences are due to their homeless situation, it is the district's responsibility to do the credit accrual or get them the tutoring or whatever it is that they need to get them caught up with their education. I would say we pretty much hit all of this, but truly, I'm going to take a minute and give you guys had a student here, the truancy example that you had. You guys had a student here who was supposed to come on the bus. And the busing was set up, and I don't even remember what district he was coming from, but it was out of district transportation. And the school district couldn't understand why the student wasn't showing up for school. And everything was set up, and busing door to door, and child should be here. After a conversation with the student, I don't know if you had it, Sue, or somebody had a conversation with the student, found out that the student was embarrassed about the bus he was on. And he was on, I guess, a van.
He was getting dropped off, pulled out in front of the high school and getting dropped off right at the curb, door to door, and that was so embarrassing him. He asked could we drop him off at the corner so he could walk in with walkers and not appear to be coming in from a different bus. And that was something we got worked out so he could be less conspicuous coming in.
Right. And the whole point of bringing this up is that a lot of times this truancy problem is a simple fix. And that was a simple fix. And sometimes it isn't, sometimes it's a major fix, but this one was a simple fix, and sometimes it's just simply a conversation that you have to have with the student or the family to get that truancy problem under control. So, what we need help with is identification. It was written into the law with ESSA that it is the school district's responsibility to identify these kids who are in a homeless situation. They won't necessarily come up to you and tell you what's going on with them. They have many reasons for wanting to hide what their situation is. But you need to know what some of the red flags are. So, and frankly, this list of red flags could be red flags for many different problems. But have it go through your head that it's possible that it's a housing problem, and that it should be referred to the guidance counselor to get a closer look. But some of the red flags are that they attend several different schools. That's a huge red flag, if they're hopping school districts. A lot of times if that's happening, the school districts are not catching that this is a homeless family, and then they're just hopping around because they keep changing housing. More than one family at an address, that is also a big red flag. Sometimes it's simply a double residency, but a lot of times it's simply asking the family why you're there. You know, and a lot of times they'll be quick to say, well, we lost our house and we ended up staying with so-and-so until we can find new housing. That's a family that would come under McKinney-Vento. Another one is that they're inappropriately dressed for the weather. Now, I know my son frequently walks out of the house really inappropriately dressed for the weather. And, but if you have kids who are showing up in the same clothing all the time, or looking dirty, or disheveled, you know, something out of the ordinary for them. Very possible that they had to pick up, leave their home for whatever reason. It could be a domestic violence issue. They could have been locked out of their apartment due to not paying rent. There's many different reasons that they may have to leave their home unexpectedly and not be able to take anything with them. And that is a big red flag. A lot of times they have unmet medical and dental needs. And that is also something that the school district can help with if that's the case. They're hungry frequently, or hoarding food. A lot of times, I hear many times that the school meals are the only meals that these kids get during the day. And it can be a big issue. Attention-seeking behavior. You're going to find that more at the younger grades, probably. These parents, the mothers, they're stressed out. They're either in a shelter, or they're trying to find housing, or they're doing something, and they just don't have time to tend to the emotional needs of their child. So a lot of times they are very, very much attention-seeking, more than your normal child would be. Missing records is a big red flag. So if they do show up on your doorstep and they say that they don't have the records that they need to enroll, then that's a big red flag for homelessness. And a simple question as to why, where were you last, and why did you have to leave, is a very easy way of finding out if they would fall under McKinney-Vento. And the tardiness, truancy, that type of thing. As I said, a lot of times they won't come right out and say that they're in a homeless situation. That's an embarrassing thing to say. Most people would not want to tell people that, so we do try to give you some ideas of other things that they may say. A lot of times they'll just say things like, well, we're looking for a place of our own. This is temporary. We're staying with friends for a little while until we can get some money together. Or we're just going through a bad time. These are all things that could easily come out of a parent's mouth when they're trying to enroll their child. And if something like that if you do hear something like that, it is something to look into. But you do want to use a lot of sensitivity with this population. I use the word homeless constantly throughout my presentations, but I never ever use it with a family. That is one quick way of putting up a boundary between yourself and the family. Nobody wants to hear themselves referred to in such a way. Other ways you can talk to them is simply saying, do you have housing of your own? Or use the term displaced, or in transition, or something like that. Another reason not to use the term homeless is that if they have a roof over their head, they're not going to see themselves as homeless. They're going to have that traditional HUD definition of homeless, where they would think homeless is somebody who's living out on a street or staying under a bridge or something like that. And they're going to say, no, I'm housed. I'm staying in this house. So rather than using homeless, use one of these other terms. The best one, I feel, is just simply saying, do you have housing of your own? And that really covers it. They are very hard to identify if they're wanting to hide what's going on with them. And they have many reasons that they want to hide it. Obviously, what we've been talking about is the embarrassment. They don't want everybody to know. But another thing is, a lot of times they're afraid to come out and say what's going on. They're afraid that children and youth will get involved, or the police will get involved, or something's going to happen that they're going to lose their children, or you're going to say, hey, you can't stay here. It doesn't matter if you're homeless, you need to go go attend that other district. They want their child to stay in the district where they've always attended, and they are not going to necessarily come out and tell you why they're not in that home anymore. A lot of times they're unaware of their rights. They don't understand what homelessness is under McKinney-Vento, so they're not going to come out and tell you that that is the situation. And a lot of times, other identification challenge is that a lot of times staff doesn't understand what homelessness is under McKinney-Vento. Hence the training, trying to spread the word on what homelessness is under this law. And your unaccompanied youth. They are probably the most secretive population that you're going to come across. They have a lot of fears, and they have a lot of fears that they're going to be returned to a home that's not suitable for them, and they don't want that to happen. So they're not going to come out and tell you what's going on, although some of them do, but many of them do not. Determining eligibility. A big part of what our job is in our office is determining eligibility of homelessness. Just because someone automatically says, if you have someone come into your school and they automatically say, hey, I'm in a homeless situation, it doesn't mean that it's just assumed that it's homeless. Your homeless liaison is going to look into the situation and make sure it falls under McKinney-Vento. If there's questions about that, we get phone calls all the time about eligibility. So I wanted to give you a little bit of idea, first of all, what Exeter does. And Sue, you want to take on that? Sure.
And some of the things that Melissa was talking about would really fall under your guidance counselors, and that's what I want to talk about. You would not be really getting into too much of a conversation with a parent, although many of you have different relationships with your parents. Maybe someone will just say something to you. Your guidance counselors are the first people that you would go to. So if any of this was kind of shared by a student, or you thought something might be going on with a student, you're not required to start the conversation, but you're required to make sure you let your guidance counselors know, and then they'll talk to the student. So I just want to make sure I clarified for that. Also, too, your guidance counselors aren't here today because they go through extensive training for this. They go to like 2-hour trainings once a year on homelessness, and they get very extensive training. So this is more the general training for the teachers and staff, and our whole other staff is trained on this. We have an audit coming up in January, and there's also a requirement that our entire staff, our bus drivers, our food service workers, everybody has been trained on this for identifying and supporting homeless students. Here at Exeter, it's your guidance counselors that you would start with. If you have any concerns or any suspicions a student might be homeless, you don't have to bring it up, but you let your guidance counselor know you might have some issues. I'm the homeless liaison, and you'll all get an extra red star if the person who does the audit says, who's your liaison in the district, and you say, I go to my guidance counselor, and Dr. Miller is the person who's the liaison, because if the auditor will pick randomly teachers in anywhere in the district to just kind of interview, and if they ask you, who's the person in charge of homelessness, make sure you say Dr. Miller. And let me know you were asked. I'll send you that gold star. Otherwise, I'll let Melissa finish up, but there's a process. We do verify someone's homeless. We verify it every summer. If someone was homeless leaving the school year, that they remain homeless, and we do investigate things. And then unaccompanied youth is quite the population here. We have, last year we had 65 students that were homeless in the district, and we're definitely on track for that this year. We have students, homeless students who they may have fire at their house, a parent may have lost their job, parent incarcerated, and there's no place else to go. We've had 2 students kicked out of their house. We've had students down in elementary asked to leave their home. And they're actually unaccompanied youth. So it's quite interesting, and we call Melissa with all kinds of questions because each case is completely different, and we look at each case individually. But your job is to know about the laws, who qualifies, and who you go to in the district if you have any questions about it.
Okay. So when determining homelessness, what Sue would look at, or if it came to our office, what we would look at is first we would check out that fixed, regular and adequate nighttime residence that we had talked about earlier. Then Sue touched on this a little bit. Then we need to look at to see if there was an event that occurred. In order to be considered homeless under McKinney-Vento, an event needs to occur, and it can be an event, any of these. And actually, this is a short list. There's many things that come across our desk that can be events that happen that can lead to homelessness. The only population that does not need to have an event occur is your unaccompanied youth. Whatever reason they leave home, it does not matter what it is, they automatically come under McKinney-Vento. But any other family needs to have an event occur. If it is a decision for that family to leave their home, they would not be considered homeless. So for instance, if you have a family who decides to sell their home and their next home is not ready, and they move into a hotel in another district for a couple weeks until their next home is ready, and then go into their new home, that time that they're in the hotel is not a homeless situation. That was a decision that they made to sell their home. But an event occurring is something that is out of their, they don't have control over it. It's out of their control. But Stu went over many of these, but yeah, we have many interesting situations that come across our desks. Next, they're going to look at how temporary the situation is. So you may have a family that is homeless in October. They got evicted from their home. They go and stay with a grandparent, and at that point, they're deemed homeless. Then they may go for the rest of the year staying with that grandparent, and by the next school year, they may still be there. Are they still considered homeless? Probably not. Probably at that point, you could say that they are in a permanent housing situation. Even though they haven't left, they're still in the same place that they were, but if everyone has a bed to sleep in, they're contributing to the household expenses, they're not looking for another place to stay, and there's not some landlord telling them that they have to get out, then it's very possible that that doubled up homeless situation is now a permanent residence. So they do that. In order to determine homelessness, you want to look at how permanent the situation is. So what happens when a student becomes housed? Well, first of all, if you have a student that is deemed homeless during the school year, they keep that designation throughout the entire school year, and they keep the rights under McKinney-Vento throughout the entire school year, which means that if they are deemed homeless in October, they find housing in December, just say they're an Exeter student and they find housing over in Governor Mifflin, they still have the right to attend Exeter for the rest of the school year. They have the right to receive transportation back and forth to school. They have the right to participate fully in your academic and extracurricular program. And then by the end of the school year and the start of the next year, if they are still in a housed situation, at that point they would need to enroll in the district where they're residing. The biggest part of that is that they do keep the rights until the end of the school year. And then, as Sue was saying, that those rights are, that their housing situation is reevaluated before the next school year begins. So here's the scenario. A mother shows up at the school's front office saying she is doubled up due to losing her housing in another state and wants to enroll her first grade daughter. The parent has no documentation with her, including no identification. Should the school enroll the child?
Yes.
Yes. This is really hard for school districts, especially if there is absolutely no identification. They don't like it. But under McKinney-Vento, they do need to enroll the student. And then they need to work with that parent to get whatever documentation is available. So what's the next step? Pretty much said it. You assist the parent in obtaining the school records and medical records and identification and anything else they need. So your unaccompanied youth. Those are the students who are not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian and lacking the fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. Many reasons that these kids become unaccompanied homeless youth. The biggest one is what Sue was saying as far as students getting just kicked out of their home. We see that on a regular basis. That kid could be 17, 18 years old, parent is tired of them, says, you're out, packs their bags, and we've had parents drive them to a street corner, kick them out of the car, and leave. That's a big one, that they're just simply being kicked out of home. Family dysfunction, parental incarceration is also a big one. And unaccompanied youth can be any age. It doesn't have to just be your high school students. We have kindergartners who are unaccompanied youth. Often those are the kids who the parent is incarcerated, or a parent gets tired of the child and drops them off at a grandparent's house with no plan for that other person to take on guardianship. These are your unaccompanied youth. Death of a parent we get periodically every year, and opting out of foster care. You're going to see that at the high school. So if you have 18-year-olds who have been in the foster care system and they're tired of the system, they may opt out, and they are not ready to be out of the system. A lot of times, if they've had a bad experience in foster care, they're tired of the system, they think they can make it on their own. A lot of times these are the kids who leave the foster care placement and are hopping sofa to sofa, relying on friends to take care of them. The other one that we see from time to time is a mother with children who may find enough room somewhere else to stay, just say with another family member, but there isn't room for every one of her children. So that oldest child is often told, you gotta find something for yourself. I can't take care of you anymore. And these are difficult situations, but these are the kids that we deal with regularly. We get a lot of questions regarding unaccompanied youth. They're really tricky for school districts to deal with because they are seen as independent students. They can enroll themselves, they can sign their own paperwork, but that's under the law. What we suggest for school districts is that they come up with their own policies regarding unaccompanied youth. Some of these policies would include, I don't know if we have special education teachers in here, but some of these policies that school districts need to have regarding unaccompanied youth are kids who have an IEP. For instance, if you have an independent student who can sign for himself, you can't have a student who has an IEP doing that. It goes against the special ed laws. So in some ways, these two laws collide a little bit. So school districts do need to have a policy as far as getting either a surrogate parent or some other caregiver to sign for your unaccompanied youth who are in special education. Other things that come up with unaccompanied youth are, I said earlier, there's no specific age limit. Also said earlier that they can have any reason whatsoever. There doesn't have to be any reason actually that if a youth leaves home, that they automatically come under McKinney-Vento. So if they left home and ran away, and they have a perfectly good home to go back to, they still come under homeless unaccompanied youth. The reason is that it's the safest place for them to be is in school, and people don't want to see these kids out of school just because they're not staying at home and if there's some kind of family problem. What else? So under McKinney-Vento with your unaccompanied youth, so like I said, they are independent students. However, the parents, they still retain the FERPA rights, their educational rights under FERPA. So if you have a student and he's unaccompanied and you want to have a parent-teacher conference, absolutely try to bring that parent in and have that parent, as much as that parent is willing, to be part of the educational process. They still have educational rights even though that student is seen as an independent student. And and the other thing is that these kids, if you have a senior who's an unaccompanied youth, absolutely, if you can identify that student and he's a homeless unaccompanied youth, that student wants to go on to college, that verification is going to benefit him. Because on the FAFSA form, if there is verification through the school district that the child is a homeless unaccompanied youth within that school year, they do not need to have their parents' income information on FAFSA, and they can fill out the FAFSA as an independent student, and that goes a long way as far as getting these kids into college. Unaccompanied youth is confusing. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay. Birth to 5. We're just going to touch on this quickly. These little guys are also part of our program. They receive the same rights under McKinney-Vento as school-age students. It was written into the law that districts are required to identify these kids. So if you have students who you think are in a homeless situation and you're aware that they may have younger siblings who are not in school, let the guidance counselors know so they can help identify these kids, because they do also receive rights as far as being prioritized for Head Start and early education programs. All the federal early education programs that are out there, they are prioritized and put into they can be put into those programs, and income and residency are not taken into consideration. Okay, some common questions that we receive are with identification. How can we make sure we are identifying homeless students when they aren't forthcoming about their situations? We've talked about that a number of times today, and how you can help identify. Anybody want to give me some ideas on what we talked about, what you think would help with identification of these kids? Yeah.
Well, I think the physical aspect, as a teacher, we get to see them. So, I mean, their overall appearance and demeanor. Are they exhausted? Do they appear to be hungry? Have they asked? Did we hear them ask, does anyone have any food or anything like that? If they're wearing the same clothes over and over again.
Yep. Yeah, and that's a huge part of it. That's why you guys are so important to this process, because you do see them on a daily basis, and you can see what those changes are. Other ways of helping with identification is, go ahead.
On the other side of that is if you just stop seeing them. If you were used to seeing them and then they just stop showing up.
Yes, definitely a huge red flag that something's going on. Anything else? Okay.
Maybe underachieving.
Yes.
Because you were saying.
If they're normally a B student and all of a sudden they're a D student, yeah, that's a big red flag. And other ways of getting the word out. Those are great identification strategies for you guys as staff. And but the other thing that school districts need to do is be able to get the word out to their families in a way that they'll see it. So something on the website. Does Exeter have something? Exeter has something on their website about homelessness. There's posters up. There's brochures around. And just having that information out there for the students and the families to see is a great way of getting the word out on what their rights are. Eligibility. How long is the family eligible for McKinney-Vento? As long as they're in a homeless situation, or until the end of the school year. So if they're homeless and get housed, they're eligible to the end of the school year. But we have families who are chronically homeless. They are homeless year after year after year. So there is no definite time frame. Enrollment. What if a homeless student tries to enroll but doesn't have the required immunizations? We touched on this. You need to enroll, but then the school district works with the family to get those immunizations up to date. Dispute resolution. What happens if a school district disagrees with the family about McKinney-Vento eligibility? It often comes to our office. There are times that when a family says they're homeless and a school district does not believe that they're in a homeless situation, we really try to have the school district figure it out. But if it gets to the point where they're not sure what's going on, it will come to our office. Once in a very, very, very long while, it will go up to the Department of Education, but we do try to work it out at our level. But there is a formal dispute process. And transportation. Is there a mileage limit for transportation of homeless students? There is nothing written into the law as far as how far a district would have to transport a student. Everything is based case by case. If you have a senior who is an hour and a half away and it's April, yes, the school district will transport to get that kid to graduation. If you have a third grader who is in a homeless situation, an hour and a half away, and it's December, then probably no. Probably it would be recommended that the family enroll in the district where they're residing. Everything is case by case with McKinney-Vento, which always makes it more interesting. I do have a couple scenarios if we have time, or do we need to wrap it up? Wrap it up? All right. If you have any questions, let me know. We can talk afterwards. Otherwise, thank you so much for having me here today.